How do you stop complaining and criticizing your husband? Well, that's the question we received for our Q&A series, and we're going to answer that today. Stay tuned.
You don't want to miss it.
You're listening to Marriage Mania, where we are audacious, sagacious, and tenacious for the Lord to uphold godly marriages and to raise fervent children who are countercultural and stand for biblical truth.
Welcome back. I'm Tanya.
And I'm Michael.
And today we're going to answer this question the best we can biblically on how do you stop complaining and criticizing your husband? There's dissatisfaction in the heart, and we're going to get into this conversation. Let's get into it. So we've been on a Q&A series the last month or two, and we have been getting so many questions. And the question we have is, how do I stop complaining and criticizing my husband? Because there's dissatisfaction, and maybe we don't know the full story behind it. We don't know all the details, but when we think about the grumbling heart and the grumbling spirit, God tells us in Philippians 2:14, do everything without grumbling or complaining. Now that could be hard if maybe there's some tension in the marriage, there's some dissatisfaction that's happening, or maybe people don't feel heard, or there's a lack of communication that's happening in the marriage.
Complain about.
Yes, there's a lot to complain about. There's so much to complain about every single day. We can complain about not getting enough sleep, or not, having a conversation without being interrupted. There's so many things to complain about. And, we really have to look at our marriages in a different light. And it is hard depending on what the situation is, right? I mean, the situation could be really challenging. There could be some massive communication problems that are happening where one just feels so unheard and talked over. And that could lead into this criticizing, and then there's this back and forth cycle that happens, that the negative cycle that you just can't get out of. Like,
you can form a habit. I mean, it sounds like
a habit
that we can easily fall into the habit of complaining, to where we just kind of reinforce this complaining spirit in us, and our brains can kind of get locked in to that. And the Israelites had a lot to complain about in the wilderness, and they did complain a lot, but that didn't allow them to get off the hook, where God was like, I understand, because this is a rough life. God called them out on complaining, even in our hard times, when things aren't going well and we have a lot to complain about. God wants us to have a joyful heart, to come before his presence with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise, because it's that complaining spirit is like, it like rots the bones. It physically can hurt your health. Whereas having a joyful heart, according to the Bible and according to scientific research, which backs up the Bible, having a joyful heart is what brings health to the body. And it can bring health to your marriage and to any relationship. And in fact, a lot of times when you go to a counselor, you have a child that's just off the rails. And so what happens when a child is acting out all the time? We get in a complaining spirit, and we get into getting on that child all the time. But a technique that a lot of counselors will tell a parent is, we got to flip that script. I know you have a lot to complain about, and you have the right to complain. Nobody's speaking against that. But the problem is counterproductive. And it's actually bringing your relationship deeper into more unhealthy patterns. And we got to switch that. We got to get out of the habit of complaining, and that can actually bring health, which actually will bring some good side effects. And the way we need to do that is just look for whatever you can find to compliment your child on, no matter how small. If you have to look really closely, find everything you can to compliment them on, because studies have shown that a healthy relationship needs to have at the bare minimum a 5-to-1 ratio of compliments to criticism in order to be healthy. If you can get it better than that, it's even better. 10-to-1, 10 times as many compliments then you complain. Even constructive criticisms, because it wears you out. Nobody wants to live in an environment where they're just constantly being complained about. Even if you have the right to, it still wears out the relationship. It stresses it out, and it brings it into an unhealthy place. So we got to switch that. And there's some techniques to do that as well. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. And first of all, our communication. And I'm going to bring that back up because how we communicate and the other person's receiving it could really be damaging because of our negativity and our criticism. And so we need to learn each other's communication styles. And that's why Michael wrote the book, The Conflict Manual. It's a biblical approach to communication and disagreements. And this book really narrows down a way to communicate different communication styles. And it actually analyzes a argument because we're not communicating well. And it just goes back and forth. So criticism to your spouse is going to blow up that situation. It's going to make it worse because that person feels attacked. And so now you're going to attack back, and it's just going to go back and forth, that negative cycle like Michael was talking about. But I did teach a class about speaking God's word into your marriage because that is super important. And I just want to read this quote that I received from Neuroscience is, the more we complain, the more our thoughts become formed to this way of thinking. And that's neuroscience. But the human brain is wired to remember negative experiences more than positive ones. So repeated complaints reinforces those neural pathways that make it easier to default and repeat that negativity over and over and over. And so we just really need to understand that speaking negatively is going to make your mind immediately go to that negative thought, to that criticism of your spouse. So
yeah, our brains tend to go towards the negative, and we need to know that. We
Right.
need to know that our brains, for whatever reason, wants to complain. It's like we want to vent, but the more we do that, the more our brains get locked in to complaining. And so then we want to complain more. The problem is you have an audience to this complaint and it's directed at somebody, and it hurts, and it stresses them out, and it causes them to get defensive. And, the Bible talks about not even having a nagging spirit. Are we nagging the person by just kind of harping on them? If I can just harp on them enough, I can make them do what I need to do or stop what they're doing. And that might work. And that reinforces the complaining and the nagging as well. But the problem is you might have actually got them to do the behavior or stop doing the behavior that you wanted, but at what cost? At a cost to the relationship, the health of the relationship, because it's hurting the health of the relationship by having this complaining, nagging environment, which is very heavy. It's a heavy environment to live in, and you can't have that environment without there being negative side effects. And so that's why, like, counselors are like, we got to flip the script. We got to have a positive environment here. And that's why God so much wants us to have that joyful countenance upon us and come before him with thanksgiving and praise. Even if we have something that's really hurting or harming us and that we really want to come before him, he wants to hear that too, but he wants us to first come with that joyful heart. Just thank you for the positive aspect that I can draw out of this. I know I'm learning something from this struggle that I'm going through, Lord, and I thank you that you're holding me up through this, but can you help me a little bit?
Yeah.
So it's, we need to do the same thing in our relationships, 10 times the amount of compliments than we have criticisms. And great techniques to do that in order to get in the habit to start forming those neural pathways for positivity that I've heard. A great technique we heard from Dr. Randy Schrader, who's on our podcast. If you want to listen to that podcast with him as well, he wrote a great book, Simple Habits for Happy Marriage. And he talked about how important it is to have that positive 10-to-1 ratio in your marriage of compliments to criticism. And what he suggests, at a bare minimum, it needs to be 5-to-1. So he suggested it's the 5-coin rule. Put 5 coins in your pocket, and every time you give a compliment, switch it to the other pocket, and you're trying to get at least 5 to the other side. But every time you say a criticism, you have to move a coin back to the other one because it negates the compliment. So you want 5 compliment coins in your left pocket that started out on the right pocket by the end of the day. And so that can help give you an objective way of seeing, okay, yes, I'm giving 5 times more compliments than criticisms. I would say put that more to 10, just to give yourself a little leeway and some extra healthy measure. there. And you could just simply I'm kind of a paper and pencil person. I just pull out a piece of paper, keep a piece of paper and pencil in your pocket, pull it out, check, and that seems so like fake, right? Sometimes, but sometimes you got to do this in order to form the habit, but and you can actually see that it's being done. And once that habit is formed, then you can stop with the coins or the paper and just checking the box off. But in order to get there, we need to do those kind of things in order to get into that habit. And it helps to be able to check it off, see that we're actually objectively doing it, or move the coins from one pocket to the other. So we end with like 10 coins from the right pocket to the left pocket by the end of the day. So those are some things that we can do. Keeping a gratitude journal. That's one thing that we also have as well, that a resource that we have that can help, where every day we're writing something, some gratitude, a thankfulness to our spouse for every day and we do that every day. So that can help form the habits, because we have to look for positive things that they're doing, verbalize those, and then write them down. So you're keeping track of it in that gratitude journal, and give that to them as a gift after 30, 60 or a year of doing that. They'll love that gift, and it will help form that habit of having gratitude.
I think those are all great ideas. And I want to go back to that wife who asked this question, because, sometimes you might be in a really difficult marriage and you've been praying about this, and maybe sometimes, our consequences in our situations that can continue to have this negative cycle. I just encourage you not to give up. So, I think about the complaining heart and how, we complain about so many things and be critical about it. But this is something that Moses said in Exodus 16:8, complaining is not against anyone but the Lord. And Moses said, when the Lord gives you in the evening meat to eat, and in the morning to the full, because the Lord has heard your grumbling, that you grumble against him. What are we? Your grumbling is not against us, but it's against the Lord. And so it's important for us to understand, when we grumble against our spouse, we're grumbling against the Lord. This is a marital covenant, a oneness. And, I talked a lot about this and speaking life. And sometimes it is very hard to do so. And I urge you to really look at your own heart and not really look so much on what your spouse is not doing, because if we can evaluate and let the Lord look in our heart intently and see, maybe we're the ones that need to address certain things. Maybe our words need to be different. Maybe we're coming across so disrespectful. Maybe we just are so angry and we're just not giving our spouse a chance. And there's so many things that we could say, but it's really going back, because eventually we're both responsible for our own actions. So the wife is responsible for her actions. The husband's responsible for his actions. And so I can't control his and he can't control mine. And so all I can do is control my actions and what God has put me to do. And so if I'm contributing to the problem, how can I stop contributing to the problem? And all those things that Michael mentioned about compliments and things like that, those are great ideas and tools that you can use to help your marriage. But really, it's going deeper and understanding why that grumbling is happening. Is there discontent in your heart because your husband is not doing what you want him to do, or there's dissatisfaction? Again, there's so many scenarios that could be here, but one of the key things is just allowing God to evaluate our hearts and seeing, what am I responsible for, Lord? How can I change, Lord? How can I take my criticisms and make them into compliments? How can I look at my spouse the way I saw him when we first got married, and start to think of the positive things about your spouse? Like Michael was saying, write them down and just think about them. Say it to him. And he may not receive it well, but don't take it personal, and try your hardest. Lord, I'm doing the best that I can. I don't want my tongue to cause any more flames in my marriage, as the tongue is something very hard to tame, it talks about in James. So trying to answer this question, there's so many ways that we can answer it and so many additional things that we can say. And so I hope that this was encouraging to really allow the Lord to see what's going on and really work on that criticism and work on the issues of the heart. That's really the key here. And we would love for you to share this. We'd love to hear your feedback about it as well. Put a comment and tell us more, and we will answer it through our podcast. So there's a lot of resources out there. One of the things that we talk a lot about is the biblical roles, and we want people to understand a husband has a critical role, a wife has a critical role, and having those roles work together, looking to Jesus, is going to make the marriage work in the design that God created. It's not going to always be perfect, but if we can bring our hearts to that unity by looking to Christ in our biblical roles, it's going to work out and the marriage is going to be blessed. And so that's why we wrote the Bible studies, the covering, the role of biblical husband, the helper, the role of biblical wife. And these Bible studies help us to understand how we can better respect our husband, or how we can better love our wife, even if we feel unloved, even if we feel disrespected. Those are things that God calls us to do. These are commandments in Ephesians 5. And so when we're criticizing our spouse, then we're criticizing ourselves, because we're in a marriage covenant. And so it's very important that we look at that. Those resources are available at marriagemaniaministry.com. So you can check those out. And if you really like this podcast, please give us a thumbs up. It will help us to get the message out there, and share it. We have a continued QA series, so you can check those out. Until next time.
God bless.